Welcome back to the Graham Stephan Show, and this video recently came across my desk. It's just titled, Real Estate Expert Answers U.S. Housing Crisis Questions. Wait for it, tech support. Wait for it again, Wired. So as a real estate guy myself, I want to comment on this because I've been involved in real estate as an agent since 2008. I started buying rental properties in 2011. I've continued buying properties and renovating them since then. So I'm heavily invested in the real estate market, and I want to give my thoughts about what's going on as soon as you hit the like button and subscribe. So thanks so much. Now let's begin.
Why does rent have to go up every year, but my salary doesn't? The percentage increase is almost 100% increase in the amount of rent people are paying, but income doesn't increase as quickly. A lot of the low-cost units are disappearing from the market. Landlords are charging more and more based on upgrades they've made, or they've transitioned to for-sale homes.
Yeah, definitely. The problem is that there's not enough rental development. So what ends up happening is that if you have a building, that building is going to deteriorate over time. It's going to have to be renovated, remodeled, and then what ends up happening is that once a unit's renovated, it's worth more money, rents end up going higher, and then insurance costs end up going up beyond that, capital expenditures end up going up higher, so rents almost have to increase. Like, just for some perspective as a landlord, and I know people don't like landlords these days, we're so bad, but just for some context here, my insurance charges are up about 50% in the last few years. Property taxes are up about, I don't know, I want to say maybe 7 to 10% in the last few years. So like, my own costs are going up. Labor is getting more expensive. Materials got a lot more expensive. So if you just keep the rents the same, or even if you raise rents 3% a year, you are losing money. Now, I know you could say the same about your income. Let's just say your salary goes up 3%, but inflation's 7%. Then, yeah, technically, even though you're making money, you're still losing more. You have less purchasing power than you did the year before. So to me, the reason that rents are higher is because they're constructing more luxury units, which bumps up the average cost. And then also, you just don't have enough new development at a low price point to bring down those costs. So rents end up going higher. Landlords are making less money because their costs are going up higher. It's just a bad situation that can only be solved with more building.
There's also been an increase in what's called institutional investment. In 2001, only about 18% of rental units were owned by corporations. Today, that's about 50%.
Fake news, fake news. Here's the thing, they count corporations as LLCs. That's technically a corporation, but you could be a mom and pop investor who places a property in an LLC, and all of a sudden you're a corporate landlord. What you really want to look at is corporate landlords with, in excess of like 10,000 rental units. And even then, in most cases, those landlords are doing a build-to-rent model, where basically they buy a plot of land, they build their own housing stock, and then they rent it out for a return. So if they didn't do that, that housing stock just wouldn't be there to begin with. When you really look into it, like I'm talking like big corporate landlords who own in excess of like 100 units, 200 units, they make up like less than 0.5% of what's available on the market right now. Like, it's really not as much as you'd expect. Now, I will say that investors, whether that be a mom and pop investor or just someone buying their first rental property, they do make up right now about 20 to 25% of the active bidding in the market, but 75% is owner and user. But yeah, corporate landlords are still very small when you really dig into it. So that it's not 100% factual, because you could even be just like, hey, I owned my house, I lived in there, and then I put it in an LLC and I rented it out. And now you're a corporate landlord. So that 50% number is a little misleading.
A healthy housing market has above 5% vacancy rate. The vacancy rate in New York City is actually 1.4% right now. Anything that charges less than $2,400 a month in rent, the vacancy rate is actually 0.4 to 0.8, a very low vacancy rate.
Yeah, you know why? Because rent control. So in New York City, if your rent is below a certain amount, you're never leaving, regardless of how much money you make. So that number is artificially low, just because, again, if you're locked in New York City, Manhattan, and you're paying $900 a month in rent because you happen to lock in like the 1980s, congratulations, you're never going to leave. And that's what rent control ends up doing. It ends up locking people in to their places because they don't want to give up such a good deal. And this is, again, irrespective of whether they make $1 million a year or $30,000 a year. Rent control is basically, unfortunately, it's more of a luck model where you happen to luck into the right place at the right time, stay there a while, and it's has nothing to do with your income. I think it should maybe be potentially a little more income-based, or like you could raise the rent more if a person is making over like 300 grand a year. I know that's a bit unpopular, but still, the reality is that you have some people who make a lot of money, pay nothing in rent, just because they signed a lease in the 90s. It really forces everyone today to pay much higher rents because everyone who locked in 30 years ago gets the benefit of that.
Why are houses so expensive? Number one, it's a supply and demand issue. The US is short about 4 million homes to meet the current demand. Interest rates are increasing. It's very expensive to invest in development projects. And it also encourages developers to develop luxury housing rather than more affordable housing.
Yeah, but why is that? It's because it doesn't make any financial sense to build lower end units that are affordable. That's the reality of it. If a developer's going in, they have to make money on the project, otherwise they're just not going to build. And so what ends up happening is that the only projects that are worth building and making money on are the ones that they could charge a ton of money for. So the issue to me is that there's very little incentive financially to build low-income housing. So that either needs to be subsidized by the government or built by the government. I hate to say it, but like when you're looking at the numbers of a lot of these places, like you're forced to rent really high. You're forced to build luxury units because the money's not there otherwise. By the way, I just want to say that this is also the reason why it's so important to be budgeting properly and to be tracking your expenses, to be able to save enough money to one day be able to buy a home. And when it comes to that, I do want to say our sponsor Wisefy is there to help you out. Like ever since Mint.com shut down, I've been looking for a good place to be able to track my finances, and Wisefy was able to do that, plus so much more to accelerate your path towards financial independence. Oh, and it also helps you create a realistic budget that hopefully you could stick with to be able to save more money and get closer to your goals. For example, what I really like about them is that they can help you identify just wasteful expenses by showing you exactly where your money is going, and then you could plug in your own details to determine how much more money you need to save, make, or just not spend to be able to reach your financial independence number. Like it's really a lot more catered around financial independence and like live off your money than it is about budgeting itself. So if you want to try it out, the link is down below in the description. And if you use my link, you could get a free 60-day trial to see if you enjoy it. So again, the link is down below in the description. Give it a shot. And now let's get back to the video.
Why are cities not using these abandoned towers to create affordable or homeless housing? What the is wrong with this country? Depending on the age and condition of the building, sometimes it can actually be more economically viable to demolish the building and build something new.
Yeah, this is the one thing I completely agree with her on. Like all these office spaces, it's almost impossible to turn them into residential. You spend so much money. Like she said, it makes more sense just tear down the building and start over, not transform it. It's going to be too much work, too many complications. It's just not viable, really.
What housing technologies are here to stay? Modular? Modular housing can also be referred to as prefab. Different components will be manufactured in different manufacturing sites. They're all brought back to the site and assembled kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And it also doesn't disturb the neighborhood as much.
I like that. I like the whole modular home idea. I like the 3D home printed idea. Like I like a lot of these things where we could bring down the cost of housing, because that's the one thing that has just increased year over year. And you have to think too, like so many other things are getting cheaper, like televisions, electronics, a lot of softwares. Like a lot of these things that would have been a fortune 10 years ago are now dirt cheap. Housing is the one thing, it just keeps going up and up and up. Same with cars. If we could find a way just to expedite this and simplify things and make, maybe a factory assembly line of houses, just churn them out, start building way more houses, prices would plummet. That's something that I think would be a very interesting solution.
I'm confused as to how exactly are Airbnbs affecting the housing market. A lot of rentals that would have been provided for permanent residents have transitioned to Airbnb housing, which means it reduces the amount of total rentals available on the market and drives prices up.
I could see that. Airbnb really started as like, I got a spare bedroom, let me rent that out short term. I think that made a lot of sense. I think that was a great solution. And in the beginning, I remember, years ago, I loved Airbnb. It was so nice. Now it seems that you have this classification of investor who just scoops up all these properties, furnishes them with like the bare minimum, charges an exorbitant cleaning fee. Now it's almost cheaper to go back to the hotels. It's wild. But yeah, overall, anything good will eventually just be taken to its extreme, and that I feel like Airbnb started to do, unfortunately. So yeah, I see her point on that, and I would like to see more people renting out bedrooms. I think that would be very nice.
How the Did my parents buy a house at 26 years old while I have $2,000 in my bank account? When boomers were reaching the age to buy a home, if you made about $50,000 a year, the average home at that point was about $121,000.
Yeah, she's not mentioning interest rates, though. Not mentioning interest rates. The interest rates in the 80s were like 18, 15% versus like the 2%. So, you know, it's not exactly apples to apples to say like, oh, home prices were this. Because you had interest rates. Some people are getting like 20% interest rates. Like you're paying 1/5 of the home's value every year in interest. So it's not exactly fair to say, but yes, overall, housing was a lot more affordable when you look at, you know, the average price per month based on how much the average person made. I agree. It's a mess still. But it's not the entire picture.
Why are corporations buying up houses just to rent them? There was a lot of internet speculation about a company called BlackRock buying up single-family homes and renting them out. This isn't really happening. However, BlackRock is investing in real estate investment trusts that are investing in apartment building acquisitions and rentals.
Now keep in mind though, when they buy big apartment buildings like that, it's not going to be like, you know, first-time home buyers that are going to be competing, like buying a huge apartment building. Like a lot of these apartment buildings for them are going to be like $50 million plus. They're competing with other institutional investors. Now, should housing be something of an investment like that with apartments? I don't know. You know, to a certain degree, you could say, well, what if they just build their own apartments and rent them out? They're adding housing supply to the market. They're potentially reducing the cost of rent by adding more supply. This could be a great thing. Again, I just think we need more development. But the thing is, when they develop these units, there's a big hefty cost, big financial investment that goes along. They have to get some sort of return that's comparable to that of a treasury, that to stocks, other investments that are out there. So they have to make a return on capital. So, you know, personally, I think that the government should be giving, people are going to hate this, it's a realistic solution, tax breaks to individuals and corporations to build more housing. Just incentivize them in some way to build more housing supply to help reduce the cost. The government wastes so much money anyway. Why not just waste money for the sake of lowering the cost for everybody else? Why not? That's what I think.
Why are there so few houses on the market? It takes a very long time for developers to receive approvals to build their projects. In Santa Monica, California, the average development takes 48 months to be approved.
That's insane. 48 months? 48 months. And Santa Monica, by the way, has some of the strictest rent control out there. They're the strictest on development. Their rents are some of the highest in the country. Their purchase prices per square foot are some of the highest in the country. It's because it takes 4 years to get a project approved. That is just insane. 4 years to get a project approved. Now, I get it. Santa Monica is very specific about what they want built. They don't want, you know, they don't want big skyscrapers in the middle of the neighborhood. I understand that. But there's got to be a middle ground where, like, hey, if you want to build something with like an ADU and a guest house or whatever, that you could add more supply. Like, there's got to be something that we could expedite this.
Where in the world are they getting housing policy right? One place that's getting it right is Vienna in Austria. It's dense, it's lively, it's vibrant, it's a huge hub of culture. In Vienna, 60% of people live in public housing. That compares to about 1.5% in the US.
See, why doesn't the government provide some sort of public housing? Or they build like big apartment buildings and stuff like that, and they just maintain them well, and they strive to have a lower rent, like something like that. I think might be good, because if anything, then people have more discretionary income left over to then spend on other things. So, you know, it might boost GDP. And think of all the jobs the government would create by building more housing supply themselves. Again, I just think the government wastes so much money that they could solve a lot of these issues, and like in the budget, we wouldn't even notice it.
What are the policies that would bring down housing prices? So when we're talking about housing prices, we're really talking about increasing supply. That is what is going to bring house prices down.
Yeah, it's definitely not rent control. That's not the solution to this, because rent control just basically dries up housing supply because no one wants to leave because their rent is locked in. And by leaving, the rent would reset. They're going to pay way more money. It's kind of like the lock-in effect for mortgages. Think of it that way. That, you know, the reason we have so little supply and houses are so expensive is because people are locked into their mortgage. Well, think of the same thing for rent. People are locked into their rents and they don't want to leave, and that dries up supply. And now we rely on developers to add more supply into the market, but they're building luxury units because that's the only thing that makes financial sense to build. If it were me, if I had total control, you would have to provide more tax incentives or subsidies for builders to develop. Or you build your own units, or you allow people to take their mortgage with them to the next property. That's probably the most realistic scenario that would happen, or really relax zoning. So you could build more units on a smaller plot of land. Yeah, we're going to end up with a whole bunch of skyscrapers like New York, but we're going to add a lot more housing to the market. So that is my thoughts. It might be unpopular to say, but like to me, government subsidies for developers or investors, that's like the only thing that I could think of that would realistically happen that would actually make a difference. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, feel free to add me on Instagram, make sure to subscribe, and until next time.